Hello, so I'm going to be responding to the discussion board in which we discuss whether voluntary incentivized sterilization should be used in developing countries, and my position is that it should not. The reason I believe so will be outlined in the following presentation. So first of all, I think that they're not ethical. And the reason I think they're not ethical is because oftentimes the people who are targeted in these programs, as demonstrated by the video, are usually poor people and minorities, and they're usually put toward developing countries. And people, especially people in poverty, people with drug addiction, can be manipulated. They're not in positions of power, and because of the fact that, for these people, maybe $300 or $400 could seem like a lot to make a lifelong decision. In reality, I think a person in a better economic situation would probably not be making that same decision. And I think it unfairly targets poor minorities and is basically an attempt in some sort of social Darwinistic population control, which I vehemently disagree with. As also relating to the incentive program in India, many of the women were not informed of the consequences of these surgeries that they were going under, and they were not aware of alternative methods, or they were not educated about necessarily how to use alternative methods. Singapore is also an example of why I think it would be unethical to perpetrate this type of system. I think in Singapore, as it showed that poor women specifically were targeted so that they would not have children or that they would stop at 2. However, there were incentives put in place for well-educated, wealthy women to go and have more children. And I think that this type of system and this type of mentality and approach really ignores like some of the key structural and deeper underlying causes of things like drug addiction, disease, and poverty. I do think that it is essentially eugenics. As brought up in the video with the sterilization in North Carolina, I think that eugenics is an attempt to weed out the unsavory groups of the population through things like sterilization. That's what was employed in the mid-20th century and even earlier than that. And I think it's not something that we should be looking toward. It's indeed, I think, it's shameful. And instead, what we should be looking toward is addressing the structural determinants of health and addressing the deeper root causes of addiction, of poverty, that perpetrate these systems, right? For example, in Project Prevention, they pay $300 for drug addicts not to have children. And I think that that's a terrible approach. I think that instead what you should be doing is perhaps incentivizing people who are drug addicts to go into rehab, to go get help, addressing, why is it that mostly, that a large portion of the people who go to Project Prevention are poor women of color, right? And saying that these people are engaging in social engineering, I think, is correct because they're actively trying to stop people who they view as unsavory from reproducing, without addressing why they're in these situations in the first place. Why are these people using drugs? Why are these people being targeted? Because we know that there's rich people doing drugs, but are they facing those same stigmas as people in these poor neighborhoods? So ultimately, I think that these programs just perpetrate the social systems and the structural violence, right, that led to people being addicted, that led to people becoming going into poverty and things like that. And I think the solution is allowing people to have, not incentivizing, but just allowing people and educating people about contraceptives and things like that. For example, it was stated in one of the modules that if there was better education on contraceptives in the developing world, 77% of infant deaths could be brought down by 77%. So I think that ultimately what we need to do when we look at developing countries, when we look at poorer neighborhoods, we need to say, what are the deeper reasons? Why are these developing countries in such bad shape in the first place? And I don't think it's just simply population. It's centuries of exploitation and colonialism and domination. And those are the root issues, and those are the root causes that you have to address. Same thing, if you have a lot of drug addiction in a neighborhood, why are these people drug addicted? It's because there's deeper root causes, such as poverty and things like that are forcing people into these terrible situations. So that's why I think that we should not be trying to control the population through things like incentivizing sterilization. We should allow for educating people about the various types of contraceptives, and we should allow for people to have the options of these contraceptives. But I think that the way that these voluntary sterilization programs, quote unquote, approach the issue is unethical.